Happy birthday, ThingsCon. Thank you for giving us the space to talk a little bit more about design and AI. The reason for this panel is the publication of our book, Rethink Design, a vocabulary for designing with AI. This is a product of a project called Decode. It's a European training network that has 15 PhD students across Europe working on questions around design and AI from a variety of perspectives. And as the project came to its closure, we wanted to distill all of the things that we learned into a format that is accessible and perhaps useful for people who want to get into this space and think about it and might not have all the background knowledge for it. So this is Rethink Design that I had the pleasure to co-edit with Elisa Giaccardi from Politecnico di Milano. And the book includes 17 key terms that try to express the entangled nature of designing with AI, how it, you pull on a string and it might end up in all these other places. And also, let's be frank, cut through some of the hype around AI, which is something that we will do in a second in our panel as well. Each one of the keywords, as I said, is very short, concise, and also is accompanied by some additional reading, case studies, or places where these things land in the real world, and is really meant to provide a variety of entry points, and certainly not the final word on designing with AI. And so this is the reason for our panel, and we're hoping to have a bit more time, but we're going to make it accessible and provocative because I'm sure you can't wait to hear more academics talking about their research, right? In any case, the book is available on open access through TU Delft. Scan the barcode and get your copy. Tell us what you think if you have time. And so, allow me to welcome now our speakers. Hopefully none of them falls into that hole. I don't know about you, but we've been staring at it and hoping that it doesn't turn into a disaster. Anyway, allow me to welcome Dasha Simons, who's a PhD candidate working on human aligned video. Yeah, come on up. Yeah, come on up. Yay. Dasha's working on human aligned video AI and ethics at the HVA. She's working in IBM as well on trustworthy AI. Carlos Alfrink is a postdoc at TU Delft. He works on contestable AI, and he also has a long track record as a designer, entrepreneur, and community organizer. Last but not least is Dave Murray Rust, who's associate professor of human algorithm relations at Delft. Also the co-director of the AI Futures Lab, and the one whose task is mainly to stay alive during the next couple of minutes. Yeah. All right. I've prepared one question for each one of you to kind of start our conversation and then move it from there. And Dave, I want to start with you. People talk about AI as a boon to society, the tide that would lift all boats. The best thing since sliced bread, or perhaps because we're in the Netherlands, the best thing since sliced cheese. But at the same time, right, we're learning more and more that there might be AI haves and have-nots. So my question is, you as designers working with AI, how can we craft more inclusive human algorithm relations?
Thanks, Roy. So to start with that, you've put the word relations in there. And I think we need to think about that a little bit. We're used to thinking of what stuff does. We're used to thinking of functions. And we're sometimes used to thinking of how it makes us feel, our emotional reactions to things. Relations are maybe a bit more subtle because they're things that play out over time. We have a relationship with other people, and we base those relations on many things. And it brings in questions of power sometimes, or of things like respect, of how we approach things. So when we talk about crafting relations with stuff, it's a lot more subtle than crafting what it does. And when we design things, we can hope that we make certain relations come alive. But that only happens when the things meet the world. So when we talk of relations with AI, you'll hear questions of, is it a tool or a collaborator, for instance? And I have a relationship with my collaborators that's a very human one. It's based in respect. It's based in the idea that they're autonomous and we exchange things. And it's an open question whether AI can really do that for me. or when it does it, or which bits I want to have an exchange with it on. If I see it as a tool, the relation is very different. I deploy a tool, and it becomes a little bit part of me. So I have a relation where the thing disappears in the way that I use it. So to design these relations, we need actually new ways of thinking about the stuff. With AI, it's often metaphors. Is it a helpful assistant? Is it a critical friend? Is it a pet? And these metaphors work as bundles of relations that things might have. So that's how we start to get into the practice of crafting relations. And then to make them inclusive, it means really actually thinking a lot more about the people than the technology, and not being swept up in the normalization of culture that happens when we have models that try and pretend everything is the same. So it's looking at the margins, the differences, the weird moments as sources of inspiration.
And clearly context matters. And AI has this kind of flexibility built into it, right? Many AI systems, they can do more things than one. And so I'm wondering if our intention matters here, right? Whether a tool developed for one thing could actually be used to do something else because of this flexibility.
I mean, there's an exciting thing that stuff comes out and we don't know what it is. And we're still uncovering the functions and the ways to use it and the relations that we might have to it. And you see this in the wonderful, wild experimentation that people are doing and making chatbots that encode all of their papers, or, there's so many uses things are being put to that weren't planned for, that are unfolding and emerging. The challenge where we have to be critical is the idea that because it can do many things, it can do everything, or that it's doing something in a very general, universal way.
Yeah. So the fact that we don't really know yet what we're dealing with leads me to my question to Kars. What happens when AI leaves the lab and hits the wild, so to speak? Often happens in ways that those who design it have no idea, and that means that we release objects that could cause harm, and in many cases unanticipated harm. So my question to you, in that sense, we want the public to play a role here as well. And so my question is, how can designers enable a kind of informed public deliberation on data, algorithms, and AI?
Yeah. So when they enter reality or they leave the lab, shit happens, right? Yeah.
Shit happens.
Yeah, and so my work has really been kind of mostly focusing on this question and just starting from the observation that a lot of us are then agonizing over this fact and trying to anticipate what might go wrong as best as we can, and of course that's important. But I have this kind of tragic perspective on things, so I go, well, there's limits to this, so things will inevitably still go wrong, and then what? So I'm much more concerned with, as designers, then being responsible in the sense of making sure that we can pick up on the things that go wrong and that we can course correct when it's necessary. And for that, the people actually that are subjected to these systems are crucial, right? They need to be respected as autonomous human beings, and they need to be able to act and oppose and gain control over these systems when they do things to them.
Does that require something in terms of maybe educating the public, creating some kind of AI literacy, or
no?
No.
Don't make the public responsible for understanding these systems. Just like when you cross a bridge or when you use a train, you're not obliged to understand how these things work, right? You can trust that for them to be safe. And there's infrastructure around it that for when things go wrong, you can, if needed, flag it, or it is already kind of monitored to be safe.
Yeah. So when things go wrong, what do we do?
That depends on the wrong, right? That depends on the calamity.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you deal with is contestability. So what would that mean for designers?
Connecting to what Dave was saying about metaphors, it's one for designers. I would say it means really thinking about AI in a different way. So to your point about the literacy, not thinking about it as an information problem, but thinking about it as a power problem. And so that means thinking of, in my opinion, thinking of AI systems as spaces or arenas where different people kind of compete over control for what an AI system is and gets to do to other people.
I've read recently people talking about AI being predominantly an ideological artifact. So more than a technology, something that actually shapes the way that we see reality. We recognize AI in all kinds of places, and that shapes how we think about technology in general and what we can do. And that brings into focus, I think, relations between individuals or individual designers and the kind of structures that they work with. And so, Dasha, this is a question for you. What can designers do to actually respond to the kind of power struggles and or the power structures within which they work? I mean, after all, the big players in the field, in the AI field, we kind of know who they are and what they're after: profit, capitalism, power. What can designers do to be more ethical, to develop more, shall we say, responsible, data-driven design practices?
Yes, easy question. What I think designers are extremely good at, in my personal opinion, is making really abstract concepts, such as values, such as fairness, can be also sustainability, can be something like ergonomics, maybe when you're making product design, to really tangible artifacts, perpetuated or through our technologies, but could be also through material, cultural, media artifacts. And I think that interplay between both is something that design can truly help with, specifically relating to responsible AI practices. Because if you think about what does it mean to have a fairer AI system, it means something else to probably every single person here in the room. And if you want to be able to make that translation both ways, we need designers to help, on one hand, to collect data from different perspectives, include the different stakeholders, and we have creative methods to do so. So we can actually open up the inquiry, and I think we beautifully saw examples for that, like research through design, critical design inquiry. At the same time, I think it really can help to then afterwards open the solution space for the new possibilities that are out there, and doing that through a prototypical kind of ethical thinking. And one, if I may, one thing that I've been seeing working in industry in AI ethics, suddenly companies, governments, they need to take a proactive stance in what is a fair AI system. You need to put very concrete thresholds. Okay, this amount of women can be hired, this amount of a man can be hired, if that would be a question. That's a bit scary, right? It's people can disagree on that. And therefore, or there you can withhold, or be vaguely transparent, trying to be transparent, but with a fakeness that a lot of people don't understand that. And I would like to invite more people to have this ethical, prototypical kind of way of thinking, and have perhaps test environments where also these ethical aspects can be prototyped, improved, without getting the full blame for being unethical, and at the same time improve the course of doing.
That's kind of interesting because designers expect a sense of autonomy, and then we go and we work in all kinds of large companies where there's pressure to use the latest technology. I mean, FOMO is a real thing for designers, not for everybody else. And I'm wondering, well, should it be the responsibility of individual designers to be ethical, or should it be something that we should squarely put at the feet of companies such as Big Blue?
I would say definitely both. I think as a designer, you have a responsibility. You're situated within the types of practices that you use. At the same time, you work within a system, which I think you, on one hand, can challenge. If that's something which is not in line with your values, not in line with where we want to be. So I would say both. I think it's fairly easy to blame big concepts, big companies, big governments, which I think is needed. But at the same time, I think it's also important to understand what role you can play within that movement to change it.
What role you can play. I think that's a great idea. And we also heard about fairness. I wonder, do you have ideas about what a fair AI might be? Just speak up, anybody. What does fair AI look like?
Such easy questions today.
Yeah. Come on, Marcel. I know you're itching to. What does fair AI look like?
Yeah, come on. We already had so much stage time. Well, I think a fair AI means if you would define AI as a system that kind of perpetuates decisions, like it gets an input and produces an output, that it kind of reflects the intuition of fairness we have outside of these systems. I don't think fairness is necessarily a property of AI. It's something you can compare the system to. So, and I think fairness is, you know, something that's always kind of evolving. I think if you would ask me like 10 years ago, I would very much be about like, yeah, we should put humans at the center because it's all about humans because the
Not
technology.
anymore. You weren't listening to Joanna.
No. But like that was 10 years ago, right? And we would ask now like what we consider fairness, and we'll take a broader perspective. But I think it would always be this communication between like evaluating these systems with what we feel outside.
Yeah. So we can't just apply what we feel about other things in this domain because the two are mutually evolving, essentially. What we think is fair is going to change because of our use of technology.
And that's also true, yeah.
And it's also scary given the fact that as we've heard, we don't really know what this technology can or can't do. Anybody else has ideas about what fairness in AI might look like?
When I was listening to you, I thought, isn't fair in this case, because there's no such thing as fair, being able to reflect on your limitations. If it can talk about, well, you know, people are white, because I've only seen pictures of white people, then, you know, that's fair. It doesn't know any other people because it hasn't been trained. If it can do that, sounds pretty fair.
Anybody wants to respond to that? On this stage or off the stage? There was another hand? Or Yeah, please do, Dave.
So I just want to pick up on that thing that there is no such thing as fair. There is no such thing as unbiased. Everything a system does encodes a point of view. And really the hope, to me, with these things is it forces people to articulate what they actually care about and to state their values and beliefs so that you can then argue about them as a necessary part of making a model that does them.
And that becomes really difficult with AI just because of the level of complexity, because it's in places that we don't know it is. We're not always open to its effects. What are you hopeful or optimistic about, and what are you scared about when you think about AI? Dasha.
So I would call myself still a techno-optimist, but not perhaps in the usual sense that you would think of. I think we need to acknowledge that there are fundamentally things very wrong in the way that the AI systems are created now, how the infrastructures are created at the moment. I think I heard yesterday more than 70% of all the infrastructure for AI systems is within the hand of 4 big companies. It means that governments, institutions, universities are all reliant on infrastructures that are part of those companies. So I think we need the the power structures that are currently embedded on one hand in the cloud infrastructures that are needed for that. On the other hand, in a data collection, I think that's something to be scared of if that continues in the cycle that is going now. What I'm hopeful of is that I also see a lot of resistance and ways how we could make better futures with that. So I do think technology can help us really well, and specifically AI, to also identify the biases that we had already. And I think if we use that lens, it can actually help. To give you an example, once a few years ago, one of my colleagues worked with a Dutch governmental agency, and it was for subsidy requests. And they wanted to automate that. And one of the parts that we noticed is that if you would get in a Monday morning for a certain subsidy request, the chances were a lot higher that you would get it than if you would come in at Friday afternoon. And there was a bias in the way the humans were accepting, because they thought, oh, you really well, you put effort, fresh in the morning, on Monday morning you got in, versus tired of the entire week, perhaps at the end, a bit more sloppy, and people would less likely receive that certain subsidy request. And depending what you do with that data and those insights, I think it can actually help us to formalize also a different way of society that's more equitable. So I do see potential there to do that.
Automation, but within reason.
Yeah, you could
Shall
say
we
so.
say human-centered automation, whatever that may mean. Karsten, what are you excited about when it comes to AI, and what makes you lose sleep at night?
Yeah, I mean, I think this morning's keynote by Matt Webb really nicely illustrated how Gen AI in particular is becoming kind of this new infrastructural layer. This kind of some people have been calling a means of cognition. And so what's exciting is that, I don't know, similar to something like electricity, maybe computation is now becoming something that is just something that is there and all of us can use for a variety of purposes. That's cool. But the infrastructure thing is a big deal. And so in my view, this was built up because of all the value that we created through our free labor. So these data centers, all these cables and stuff, it's actually ours. It's ours. So I'm hopeful, but also a bit worried that we won't get to own it and control it.
Let's nationalize the AI infrastructure.
Socialize the data centers.
Yeah, I love that. Dave, what are you excited about?
I don't look to technology for hope. I look to people for hope. And I feel it's a bit of a dark world out there at the moment. And now hope has to be something that we cultivate. It has to be quite an active process to keep hoping for the future. And the thing that I really like about all these new technologies is how easy it makes it to get started. Because I feel any time you have a moment where you can pursue something joyful is a step towards making a better world in the future. And so I can be very critical of the infrastructures. I can hate the way that it comes about. I can hate all of the capitalist late-stage horrors behind it. But still, if it gives more people a chance to do things joyfully, I think that's a wonderful thing. As a musician, I get really discomforted by these AI music generators that make quite shiny but really bland and generic stuff. But I spoke to someone on the train the other day who had used it to make a whole album of songs taking the piss out of one of his mates and put it up on Spotify. And that's very human. We always find ways to adapt these things and do something creative and provocative with them. So yeah, I'm hopeful for human joy.
Slop, but human-made slop. There we go. I think that's just about the time that we have. We know there's a break coming up. Do we have a few more minutes to maybe talk to our audience? Yeah, Iskander? Yeah. Anything at all you want to ask, talk, comment, let us have it.
All right, give me a mic and I'll run. You stay there. Yeah.
And if
one
you
question here.
And if you have one person in particular that you want to answer, cool. If not, I will direct it.
Okay, so you talked a lot about how these big companies have most of the power, but how do we decide who gets it and how do we split it?
Who gets what?
The power over those AI. Who decides?
And nobody's deciding right now. They just take it, right? There you go. Okay.
No, so I recognize kind of also the fatigue. So I don't want to be that guy on the one hand. So honestly, it's really. It starts inside those companies, in my view, so they need to be democratized from the inside. And you see some movements. The hopeful parts are you see, some modest attempts at unions forming inside these companies. So if you get more worker control inside these companies, I'm with Dave optimistic about people. So if people get more of a say in how these companies operate, then that would be a good thing, right? So I'm not necessarily even against bigness as such, right? I think some of these things it makes sense to do at scale, and so that's a separate matter. But they are incredibly I mean, it's a lack of democracy that we would not accept in other parts of our lives. So it's kind of weird if you think about it in those terms, that once we enter the workplace, we have so little say in how these things go. And it's not really it's not a new insight, right? And it's not like a magic bullet or anything. It's a struggle, but I think that's the direction of travel that we would want to go for. And I mean, also look for all of us. I mean, I've been part of the tech scene in the Netherlands for a long time. We are very bad at being organized and and making claims collectively. We are individualistic types in general. Well, speaking for myself, right? This is also part of the challenge for making claims, because then it becomes an individual kind of moral issue. You need to be a good person, and then if all of us are good, enlightened people, then that somehow will kind of aggregate into good social outcomes. That model does not work. I think history has shown that it doesn't work. So we need to kind of become better at coordinating ourselves.
There's a question here as well. There you go.
Hi, my name is Martin. I'm a master's student at the Javier. Hi, guys. I've got a question which is inspired by something you just said, Dasha, a moment ago, and it's about responsibility. So, as researchers who've got a keen eye on ethics, you obviously have a very good understanding of the way that design has an effect on the end result, the decisions you make as a designer and what moral implications they have. However, most designers are not researchers or not academics, and they're working, some of the most impactful designers work in big organizations. They work in government, they work for the police, and I think often a designer might say, it's not up to me what the policy is, I just get a brief, I make the design, and I send it off. How can we maybe think about reducing that distance that a designer feels from the outcome of the things that they work on, do you think?
Yeah, good question. I think one of the things here that I've learned is that sometimes people can feel alone when feeling that, right? They think, oh, I'm perhaps the only one who disagrees with this brief. And they don't dare to share that with other people who might actually feel all the same in the same room, but nobody dares to say it or ask the first question, hey, like, why is this? So I would invite people to really say things out loud, and it doesn't have to be in an activistic way, right? You can ask it as questions. And in my experience, you notice that actually a crazy amount of other people, they feel exactly the same way as you do. And together, on one hand, you can feel more supported, emotionally perhaps, or with what discussing. And on the other hand, it's also easier to organize yourselves to perhaps change something which shouldn't be that way. And I think that's one way to, as an individual, start that, because I do think there need to be things changed from a policy level as well, right? Not the full responsibility lies from bottom up. Although I would say that really helped, in my personal view, to know that you're not alone in having these questions.
I think it's a fair point, though. Much like with climate change, it's unfair to put the problem at the feet of those who have no other choice in many cases, right? Designers not necessarily will step up away from a workplace just because the policy doesn't work to their benefit. Maybe some of the power that we have is not as designers, but as citizens. Vote, lobby, push for regulation. Yeah.
Can I also throw in? I mean, this comes a bit from Carl DeSalvo. The idea that designers have the power to change the world is actually mostly a way to make some really unhappy designers when they realize that they don't have the power to change the world. But what designers are really good at is bringing problems into the form that other people can grapple with, and that's how we can make change. So when you're given requirements, you don't have much choice within that. What we can hope is that we make sure the next set of requirements is slightly more consciously constructed.
Do we have maybe a question back to you? Do we have the power not to use? Because this is, one thing that I'm kind of bothered is that AI has this sense of inevitability at this point. It's just like, yeah, it's coming, it's here, everybody's going to use it. Either adopt or fade away and become extinct. Do you feel like you still have some autonomy to not use AI?
Yep. Wait. Hi.
The talking stick, very nice. No, actually, I don't, because I feel like the big companies basically snuck underneath the adaptation cycle, right? Most of the time we have like early adopters, and then we decide it's wonderful, and then we decide it's mundane, and then it's nothing. We kind of skipped through that and basically confronted everybody with the power, or at least being a producer of slop for the AI to make sense of, I guess. So, no, we don't have a choice at all.
Really good point.
Yes, one here. Heike.
Just to add maybe a little hopeful note, we did a study for a big policy think tank, and we interviewed a lot of people who use AI in their work, from computer-based people as ambulant workers. And of course, everybody says we win time, it's more productive, more efficient. And we asked them what's the good things, and many people answered actually. They say, well, now I have more time for human relations with my other colleagues, and to choose quality time for things that I really care about as well. So that also happens. It's not yet immediately filled with more tasks and more efficiency.
It will be, don't worry. Can we take this one as well?
Yeah, hi. I think we absolutely have the power to pull the plug and not use it. If you compare it to nuclear energy, for example, there we also decided not to use most of the approaches that were forecasted. So just don't use it.
I don't know if that's a good example, because most of the AI companies are now investing in nuclear energy.
Exactly.
They are.
There you see, the evil companies work together.
I see one more hand and one more hand, and then we'll be done.
Go here and then. Oh, yes, please come.
Hi. I was wondering, what do you think AI and how everyone thinking we're going to use it more and more, perhaps? What would the effect be on like diversity, and would it be more perpetuating the dominant culture, or like what are those effects?
Again, easy question. It depends how we would design the systems, right? So I think one of the challenges that you see now is more this algorithmic monoculture. On one hand, also that places look the same across the world, but that's not what I would like to focus on. I would like also to share that the security aspects, because the data foundations are similar, the infrastructures are similar, that all those models use, means also the security issues and breaches are also similar. So you have, in that sense, also an algorithmic monoculture created with the same security threats. So if one breach is there, actually a lot of systems, more than before, would go down. That's one thing. It's a slightly different way than I think you meant culture in this way. The other one, I think it really depends how we design the systems to do so. You could adjust the temperature in a way that actually is more diverse. If you train into more diverse data sets, you can actually ensure that the output is to a certain extent is also diverse of generative AI. However, it's always based on a view of the data that is collected. It's a kind of a way looking at history and perpetuating that towards the future. And we can have an influence on how we want to adjust that. So I think it really in the design element on foundation, how the systems are made, could have an impact if we produce this monoculture idea, or if we go towards a more diverse, pluriversal way of designing our future, if that answers your question.
Can I throw a couple of things in? I've had a moment to think. If I think of the parallel to social networks, 10, 15 years ago, we let the companies get away with this idea that we would talk to each other the same way everywhere in the world. And that kind of slipped under the radar, and we ended up with these very homogeneous platforms for communication. Now, when we're building models, we've actually had a bit of time to think collectively, and there's a bit more sensitivity that they shouldn't all be the same. And you see things like in New Zealand, they create language models based on Te Reo that are entirely different and encode other kinds of cultures. So it's very easy to end up in this algorithmic middle ground, the center of the bell curve. But there is a little bit of hope that diversity is more a part of the discussion than it used to be, and we can't just do it unthinkingly.
And at the same time, those of you or us on Blue Sky have realized that the alternative to Twitter is Twitter minus Elon Musk, right? Not very diverse either. We had one more question over there.
Okay, last question. Yeah,
or response or anything else.
Just, you actually kind of covered this a little bit already, but literally the day before I came to this conference, I was on Facebook and somebody was ranting about AI being too woke because it's showing, if you show me a picture of a board meeting, it would have like a black person and a woman on it. And he's like, that's not realistic. So that made me think, again, if all the AI companies, for the most part, or the big ones, they're all American, and now we have a change in administration and so on, and what happens if you socialize these data centers in future America? Do we have, I don't know enough yet about this, but do we have, that kind of diversity in a deeper sense? Do we have a Europe-based AI or that kind of thing?
Perhaps big AI players from the global south may not be the answer to that, because they will follow the same kind of logic of capitalist accumulation. So, not to leave you with nothing but depression. Dave is hopeful as well.
Dave was doing a great job as the Mr. Sunshine on the panel, I have to say.
Thank you so much, Dave Murray Rust, Kars Afring, Dasha Simons. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Okay.